Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about how agriculture encourages the growth of blue-green algae and what effects that has on lakes and rivers in Minnesota. So first, this is just an overview of today's presentation and what we're going to talk about. So first, we're going to start with just an introduction of what blue-green algae is. So I'm sure many of you have seen this before if you live in Minnesota, and it's becoming more and more familiar every year. This is what blue-green algae looks like, and it kind of takes over the water and makes it hard to do certain activities, which is frustrating for some of us. So blue-green algae is actually not an algae at all. It's a type of cyanobacteria, which is a kind of bacteria that is capable of photosynthesis, and it thrives in warm water and it prefers shallow waters that are rich with nutrients. And cyanobacteria actually produce cytotoxins, which makes this bacteria, this algae, harmful to humans and animals. So next, we're going to just talk a little bit about what it looks like today in Minnesota. So you can see here the graph on the left is the percent of lakes in Minnesota with good water quality, and you can see that about less than half have more than 80% good water. And then for rivers and streams, it's a lot less than that. It's mostly just the northeastern part of the state that's good. As you can see, central Minnesota and southwestern Minnesota are really struggling. 1/3 of the bodies of water on Minnesota's impaired waterways list are impaired for recreation, just because of a high level of bacteria. And in 2020 alone, 581 new waterways were added to that list. So as you can see, Minnesota's water quality is indeed declining. One of the most common pollutants in Minnesota water is nitrate, and nitrogen is a important component of fertilizers that are used in fields and on farms and such. So that's the reason why it is one of the most common. Nutrient-rich waters are really present because of agricultural practices. And when I say nutrient-rich, I mean the thing in the water are fertilizers, pesticides, bacteria, and other oxygen-demanding substances, and a lot of those do come from farms. And so next, we're going to talk about how that impacts the growth. So nature has its own plumbing system in which water drains to the soil, and that filters it, and it makes its way into the bodies of water. But because of human development and a lot of agricultural development, it kind of, as you can see with that graph there, kind of messes with that natural plumbing system, and the drainage systems that farmers developed from their fields really kind of bypasses that whole filtering through the soil, and just really kind of brings a lot more of those nutrients into the waters. Like I said, that's mostly because of things like drain tiles and ditches and straightening stream beds and allowing livestock to graze near the streams. Just allows for a lot quicker water movement, which accelerates erosion and just really encourages that nutrients traveling to the water. So one little vocab word here I want to point out is non-point source pollution, which is defined as any pollution that is carried by runoff. So that's kind of important when talking about this topic. And there are 5 major non-point source pollutions that are coming from agricultural practices, and you can see that that includes sediment, pesticides, bacteria, nutrients, and oxygen-demanding substances. So now we're going to talk about the effects on the environment. If any of you have seen blue-green algae near lakes or lakes around Minnesota, you know it's kind of a thick, sludgy, gross, slimy substance, and that can be really harmful to wildlife. And it also, with it being toxic, that can be really dangerous for livestock and wildlife and pets. So in the right conditions, when it's really warm and there's a lot of nutrients in the water, these algae blooms can really take off. And when it gets really dense like that, it kind of blocks the sunlight, which makes it hard for the plants that are underneath the water to grow properly. And those plants are a source of food for animals in the water. And so overall, it's just really harmful to the habitat. And when the blue-green algae decomposes, it requires a lot of oxygen. And so it kind of like leaves this water with no oxygen in it, and everything else just kind of dies off. And it also releases a lot of toxins while it decomposes, which is really harmful. As you can see here, this is one of the biggest dead zones in the US and in the world. It's the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, where the Mississippi River drains. And the main reason for that is because, I mean, tons and tons of agricultural runoff is draining into the Mississippi and coming out into the Gulf, and basically just creating this huge dead zone where nothing can survive. We're just going to touch a little bit on the effects that this has on humans. And so, as you have seen through the pictures, it kind of just makes the water really icky and unsafe. And so it can be really hard to go fishing, boating, swimming, kayaking, all kinds of stuff. It just really gets in the way and makes it hard to do that kind of stuff. Also, if it is ingested on accident, like if you're swimming or something, it can cause upset stomach and diarrhea and even liver and kidney damage. Also, another thing to note is that when there's so much of this algae in all of our main water supplies, it can really diminish that supply, and it can be hard to get fresh water into our tap system. Another thing is that blue-green algae is especially dangerous to dogs. For any of you guys that have pets and you like to go to the lake or you live by the lake, you know that you have to keep your dogs out of the water because this is a huge threat to them. They're really vulnerable to it just because of their natural behavior. You know, they like to swim in the lake and drink the water, and when they get out of the lake, they like to lick the water off of them, and they also are attracted to just the smell of that algae, and consuming that can be really hard on them, and it can cause diarrhea, loss of appetite, and abdominal swelling, disorientation, all these kinds of things that can even lead to death. So I just want to touch on some important things for farmers, just because like their practices are a main reason for this problem. And so some really important things to remember are soil management, crop rotation, nutrient management, and seeding for sediment control. So just like being aware of how much erosion you're allowing to happen, and the more like plants like trees and shrubs that you can keep around your streams, well, that'll catch a lot of the runoff, and ultimately it'll get less into the lakes and rivers and stuff. And that's another reason like crop rotation is really important, just because those roots catch a lot more of that runoff and things like that. And farmers can also make sure that they're properly managing manure. Like I mentioned, buffer strips along the shores, having plants there, and keeping livestock away from the water, and make sure that they are storing fuel and fertilizer and pesticides properly so that it's not leaking into the water supply. Just some key takeaways here at the end. Blue-green algae is a toxic bacteria that thrives in nutrient-rich waters. It's really its growth is really encouraged by certain agricultural practices. It can be really harmful to the environment and humans and their pets. And so better farming practices could ultimately help diminish that problem. All right, thank you for listening.